You know what's weird? It's the sound of old TV shows. I just can't listen to them anymore. The canned laughter, the obnoxiously cheerful theme music, the over-the-top sound effects. It makes my skin crawl. It makes my stomach feel like it's full of cold, wet cement. My therapist says it's a trigger, a classic symptom of PTSD. I think it's something else. I think it's hate. It all goes back to a year ago, to the night Donovan came back. I thought I was done with him, I really did. I had the restraining order, I'd blocked him on everything. But he was always good at finding the cracks. That night, the crack was the flimsy lock on my apartment's kitchen window. I won't get into the ugly details of what he was shouting or the sour smell of whiskey on his breath. What's burned into my brain, the part that truly matters, is the floor. The feeling of the cheap, scratchy wool of the rug against my cheek. He had his knee in my back, his hand clamped over my mouth, and I was screaming into his palm, the sounds muffled and useless. For a second, he loosened his grip to grab my arms, and I screamed for real. A raw, ragged sound that tore out of my throat. It wasn't a movie scream, it was ugly and desperate. And in that moment, my head was turned towards the window. My window looks directly across a narrow courtyard into the window of apartment 3 billion, and I saw it. The slats of his blinds were angled just so, and behind them I saw a silhouette, a shape, Mr. Gable, the quiet old man who I'd only ever seen checking his mail. He was standing there perfectly still watching. A part of me, a stupid, hopeful part, thought he's going to call the police. My scream hitched into a sob of what I thought was relief. But he didn't move towards a phone. The silhouette shifted slightly. And then the sound from his apartment, which had been a low murmur, erupted. It was a wall of cheerful, idiotic noise. A sitcom. I could hear the fake audience roaring with laughter as a xylophone trilled manically. The sound was so loud it vibrated through my floorboards. It washed over everything. It drowned out my voice, my struggling, my terror. It was a thick, syrupy blanket of noise that just erased me. Donovan flinched at the sudden volume, and in that moment I managed to kick back and get away. But the thing I remember isn't the escape. It's the sound. He didn't help, he just turned up the TV. The physical bruises from Donovan faded in a couple of weeks. The legal mess, the new restraining order, the statements to the police that took months. But the real damage, the stuff that stuck, was from next door, the silence from next door. It seeped through the walls like a toxic mold. After that night, my world shrank to the size of my apartment and the view of his window. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was an observation post in a war only I was fighting. I became the watcher. It was a sick, obsessive reversal. I bought a new deadbolt, a bar for the sliding door, even a ridiculously expensive security camera that pointed at my own front door, but none of it made me feel safe. Safety wasn't about keeping Donovan out anymore. It was about understanding what happened in apartment 3 billion. I started learning his rhythms with a terrifying focus. Mr. Gable. I didn't even know his first name. He was just this phantom. Lights on at 7 p.m., a flicker of the TV screen visible between the blinds. Lights out like clockwork at 10:30 p.m. On Tuesdays, a grocery delivery service would leave bags at his door. He'd wait a full hour before opening the door a crack, his hands snaking out to pull them in and shutting it again. He never had visitors. I bought a pair of cheap binoculars, and I'd sit in my darkened living room for hours, my elbows resting on the windowsill just watching. The notebook I kept became my Bible. 7:14 p.m., blinds adjusted. Angle seems lower tonight, hiding. 8:32 p.m., TV light changed from bluish news to orange old movie. 9:05 p.m., shadow paced back and forth 3 times. I was losing my mind. I knew I was. My friends couldn't get it. Zara, he's just a weird old guy, my friend Chloe said during one of our increasingly strained phone calls. The person who hurt you was Donovan. You should be focusing your anger on him. Have you tried that new therapist I told you about? You don't get it, Chloe, I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. Donovan is a monster, I understand. He's a known quantity of rage and entitlement. But Mr. Gable, he's a different kind of monster. He's a void. The void. Zara, you're not making sense. Let's go out. Let's get a drink, get you out of that apartment. I can't, I'd whisper, looking at his window. I have to be here. What if I miss something? The one time I saw him up close sealed it for me. I was taking out the trash, my heart pounding just at the thought of being in the hallway. As I walked towards the chute, his door opened. We were maybe 10 feet apart. He was shuffling, his eyes fixed on the floor ahead of him. He had to have seen me in his peripheral vision. I froze, holding the garbage bag, my breath caught in my chest. This was it. He would look up, his eyes would widen with recognition, with guilt, with something. But he just kept shuffling, his face a blank mask of wrinkles and indifference. He passed me without a flicker of acknowledgement and disappeared down the stairs. He didn't just ignore me. He looked through me. That's when I truly understood. It felt more personal than a punch to the face. It felt like a judgment on my very existence. My screams, my terror, my life, they weren't even worth acknowledging. I was just an inconvenience, a noisy neighbor. He had taken my scream and turned it into a punchline for a show I couldn't see, and I needed to know why. Update: wow, okay, I didn't expect this to get so much attention. My inbox is a mess. Thank you seriously to everyone who sent kind words. It helps more than you know. Just feeling seen, I guess, which is ironic. A lot of you are asking the same questions, so I'll just try to answer them here. First, why don't you just move? I wish it were that simple. I'm a freelance transcriptionist. My income isn't exactly stable, and breaking a lease in this city costs a fortune. On a deeper level, though, it feels like running away. It feels like letting him win. I have this horrible, knowing feeling that if I leave without understanding why, this feeling will just pack itself up and move with me. I'll be seeing him in the windows of every new apartment. Second, why haven't you confronted him or report him to the police for not helping? I asked the police about that. They were sympathetic, but they said there's no crime in being a shitty person. There's no law against being a coward. You can't arrest someone for turning up their TV. As for confronting him, I tried once. About a month ago, I had 2 glasses of cheap wine and worked up what I thought was courage. It felt like my heart was going to beat its way out of my chest as I walked down the hallway. The air felt thick. I stood in front of his door 3 billion for what felt like an hour. My hand was shaking. I finally just knocked 3 times, not too loud, not too soft. I waited, nothing, then I saw it. The little brass peephole cover, which had been open, slid shut. He was there. He was standing right there on the other side of the door looking at me. I knew it. Mr. Gable, I said. My voice sounded small and pathetic. I want to talk to you. Silence. I could feel him there. I could feel his silence. It was an active, heavy thing. It pressed against the door. I stood there for another minute, my face burning with humiliation, and then I just turned and walked back to my apartment. I didn't even make it to the couch before I started crying. Not because I was scared, but because of the sheer, soul-crushing helplessness of it all. He has all the power. He's locked in his little box, and I'm locked in mine, and he's the one with the remote control. The turning point didn't come from my obsessive watching or my late-night spirals. It came from a leaky faucet. The building had recently been sold, and the new management company was, for once, surprisingly competent. They sent out a notice about routine maintenance checks. A few days later, a man named Hector showed up at my door. He was a cheerful, round man in his 50s, with a tool belt that had seen better days and a voice that was permanently set to a friendly boom. "Kitchen sink, right?" he said, stepping inside and giving the apartment a quick, professional once-over. "Should be a quick fix. Old pipes in this building, they sing more than they flow." He was a talker. As he worked, he filled the silence I'd grown so accustomed to with easy chatter about his kids, the traffic, the ridiculous price of lumber. It was so normal. I found myself actually relaxing for the first time in months. I made him a cup of coffee, and as he was tightening the last joint under the sink, I did something I hadn't planned on. The words just tumbled out. "So you're going to be the new permanent super?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "That's the plan, Hector, at your service," he grunted, sliding out from under the sink. "Gotta get to know the tenants. Most folks are pretty straightforward, but every building's got its characters." My heart started to beat a little faster. "Yeah. Like who?" He chuckled, wiping his hands on a rag. "Well, I haven't met everyone yet, but I had to change the smoke detector battery for the fella in 3 billion yesterday." "Mr. Gable." The name hung in the air between us. I held my breath. "Now there's a quiet one," Hector continued, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. He took a sip of his coffee. "Poor old guy. Told me he worked at the steel mill over in Chester for 40 years. Said one day back in the 90s a compression valve blew right next to his station. The blast, well, it pretty much took his hearing with it." I just stared at him. The coffee cup in my hand felt suddenly heavy, alien. "He's a nice enough fella, just in his own world, you know." Hector finished his coffee and stood up, patting his stomach. "He's deaf as a post. Has to have one of those special phones with the flashing lights and reads lips a bit if you're right in front of him. Anyway, that should do it for the lake." He gathered his tools, gave me a final, booming "have a good one," and left. The door clicked shut and the silence he had filled rushed back in, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was heavier, colder. The floor felt like it had dropped out from under me, deaf. The word echoed in the sudden, vast quiet of my apartment. Deaf, deaf. The word didn't bring relief. It didn't bring closure or understanding. It was like I had been trying to solve a simple math problem for a year, obsessively checking my work, and someone had just handed me the answer. But the answer wasn't a number. It was a page from a book written in a language I'd never seen before, a language of pure, cold horror. I stumbled back to my couch, my legs unsteady, and sank into the cushions. My mind, which had been a frantic storm of paranoia for a year, was suddenly terrifyingly clear. I replayed that night in my head, frame by agonizing frame, but this time I was watching it through a new lens. A crueler lens. He couldn't hear me. He couldn't hear my screams tearing from my throat as Donovan's hand clamped over my mouth. He couldn't hear the thud of my body hitting the floor. He couldn't hear Donovan's guttural curses, the promises of what he'd do to me. He couldn't hear me begging, the pathetic, muffled pleas for a life I thought was about to end. He heard nothing. The noise from his apartment, that wall of sitcom laughter and goofy music, it wasn't for me. It wasn't a malicious act designed to drown me out. It was for him, of course. He had to have the volume cranked up to a deafening roar just to feel the vibrations through the floorboards, to catch the flashing colors on the screen, to follow along with the captions that were his only link to that world. He was just watching TV, and then the final, most hideous piece clicked into place, locking into my soul with an icy finality. He saw me. The blinds were angled. The lights in my living room were on. He saw the struggle. He saw the pure animal terror on my face, the wild look in my eyes. He saw another human being, his neighbor, the woman he passed in the hallway, being violently assaulted just a few feet away. He saw the shape of a large man holding a smaller woman down. You don't need hearing to understand that picture. It's the oldest, ugliest picture in the world. It's a silent movie that everyone knows the plot to, and he stood there, he watched. And his response, his only response, was to do nothing, to just continue with his evening. This was so much worse than the monster I had invented. My monster, the one who turned up the volume out of spite, was at least engaging with me. He was participating in my reality. His cruelty was a form of connection. It was evil, but it was a human evil born of human emotions like malice or sadism. This was something else entirely. This was an absolute, profound, cosmic indifference. My suffering was no more real to him than the wacky antics of the characters on his television screen. I wasn't a person in peril. I was just a flicker of movement in the window opposite his own, an uncaptioned foreign film. He saw and he felt nothing and he did nothing and he went on with his night. The fear I'd felt from Donovan was a hot, sharp thing like a knife. This new feeling was a vast, glacial cold. It was the horror of realizing you are utterly, completely alone, even when someone is looking right at you. The horror of realizing that to some people you are not a person at all, you are just scenery. And the scenery was a little frantic tonight, so he just kept his eyes on the show he'd chosen to watch. The canned laughter from his TV wasn't mocking me, it was just a soundtrack to his utter disengagement from my humanity. For the first time in a year, the silence in my apartment felt real. It wasn't the loaded, watchful silence of before, it was just empty. The obsession that had fueled me, that had become the central pillar of my life, was gone. And in its place was a quiet, bottomless despair. I had my answer. The mystery was solved, and the truth was 100 times more devastating than anything I could have imagined. There was no grand evil, no secret sadist. There was just a man who saw a thing and decided it had nothing to do with him. I stopped watching his window. I put the binoculars in the back of my closet. I threw the notebook with all my meticulous, insane observations into the trash. It all felt so pathetic now. I had been screaming into a vacuum and I hadn't even known it. A week later, the final paperwork for the extended restraining order against Donovan arrived in the mail. The court date was set. My lawyer was confident. It should have felt like a victory, a final closing of a painful chapter. But as I held the papers in my hand, I felt nothing. The threat of Donovan felt mundane now, almost manageable. The real wound wasn't from him. The real wound was the knowledge of what Mr. Gable had shown me. That night I did something I hadn't done before. I took out a piece of plain white paper and a black marker. My hands were perfectly steady. I wrote 5 words in big, clear block letters. I know you saw, you did nothing. I didn't know what I hoped to achieve. There was no anger left, just a cold, hollow need to make him acknowledge it. To force him for just 1 second to be a participant instead of a spectator. I walked down the hall, the piece of paper folded in my hand. I slipped it under his door, 3 billion. It disappeared into the darkness on the other side. I went back to my apartment and sat on the floor, my back against the wall we shared. I waited. For 5 minutes, the familiar, muffled rumble of his television continued. Then it stopped. Abruptly. For the first time since I moved in, the apartment next door went completely, utterly silent. And we just sat there on opposite sides of the wall in a shared, suffocating quiet. Final update, it's over. The police came this morning, not for me, for him. Hector, the super, had apparently been trying to reach Mr. Gable for a couple of days for a plumbing inspection and got no answer. He used his master key. They found him in his armchair, facing the TV. The medical examiner said it was a massive stroke, probably happened a day or two ago. They found my note on the floor next to his chair. The police asked me a few questions, but it was all very routine. An old man living alone, these things happen. As they were taking his body away, I saw it. Tucked into the side pocket of his armchair was a small, worn, leather-bound photo album. One of the paramedics must have jostled it because it fell to the floor and flopped open. The picture on top was of a young woman smiling with the same quiet eyes as Mr. Gable. Written in faded ink at the bottom was "My dear daughter, Alina. Taken from us too soon." I feel nothing, not relief, not guilt, not sadness, just quiet. He's gone, the TV is off for good, and I'm still here.